Manever I say ma PENDREAM TV. PENDREAM TV there, I see them yopo.
You are once again welcome to PENDREAM TV, the only channel that brings you the best and latest updates in politics. If you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for more updates, like and also share to other members to watch as well. Can you equally leave a comment after watching or send us a voice note on our WhatsApp number, it is 0277 128 777. Thank you. I want you to join me listening to what Kwesi Pratt have for us this time around again about the election and its outcome. Without much ado, I would like you to join me listening to his analysis on the election and its outcome and its defeats, which the MPP cannot bear. Thank you. Stay tuned.
Thank you very much. Okay, let me conclude that Bill Mandela, who says, good morning. Senator, the NDC must not leave any stone unturned. They should not be swayed by Jim Benson's "it is finished" phrase. They should up their vigilance and reactivate their surveillance system. They should never say die until the bones are rotting. Comment?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to look at the Electoral Commission as an institution. Yes, you cannot evaluate the general conduct of the elections without looking at the Electoral Commission as an institution. And it became very, very clear sometime in 2017 that the incoming administration was determined to create an Electoral Commission which was favorable to it. The 2016 elections had been marked by a campaign of slander and vilification against the then chairperson of the Electoral Commission. And it was clear that this bogus campaign of slander and vilification was absolutely baseless. Indeed, some in the MPP communication team then had gone out and alleged that the chairperson of the Electoral Commission was a member of the National Democratic Congress without providing any evidence at all. Some even went to the extent of claiming, rather shamefully, that the Electoral Commission, the chairperson of the Electoral Commission, who was a married woman, responsible married woman, was the girlfriend of the candidate of the National Democratic Congress and so on. Now these months of vilification, including bogus court cases and so on, led to a situation where eventually Madame Charlotte Osei was removed as Electoral Commissioner along with other commissioners in order to pave way for the appointment of new commissioners. That was the beginning of the problems of the commission. Now, it is clear to anybody who cares to look that this commission cannot be described as neutral, as unbiased, and so on. Now, that is clear from pronouncements which have been made by some of the commissioners. And all of us are familiar with the commissioner who publicly stated that as far as he was concerned, the National Democratic Congress, which is a contestant in the elections, was a threat to the democratic order in Ghana. Now, if you have a commissioner, if you have a member of the commission who believes that one of the contestants is a threat to the democratic experiment in Ghana, it follows clearly that he will do everything in his power and out of his power in order to ensure that that party does not continue to threaten the democratic order. I mean, that was a most unfortunate statement. It was a statement which was sent the alarm bells ringing from that time. However, this person continues to remain a member of the commission, supervising elections involving a political party that he thinks is a threat to the democratic order. Now, there were also problems at IPAC to the extent that the National Democratic Congress had to boycott IPAC over a very long period of time. Then came another theater which was worrying as far as I was concerned. Anytime the Electoral Commission had to take a decision or there was a dispute about some decision that the Electoral Commission had taken, they resorted to vote buying on the IPAC. So you had several situations where inconsequential political parties and so on teamed up with the New Patriotic Party to declare support for decisions that the Electoral Commission had taken. And it sounded as if, you know, the parties had equal strength, they had, and so on, so decisions were taken on the basis of vote and so on. Now, as far as I can remember, the IPAC was not established to become a voting institution. It was an institution which was set up to become a place where consensus was reached on issues. But somehow, this Electoral Commission turned it into a voting institution. And at the end of some of the decisions, we found some of the political parties actually declaring for the EC, usually with the support of the New Patriotic Party. The aesthetics, you know, of that didn't look good at all. Because you saw an Electoral Commission deliberately and purposely manipulating members of the IPAC in order to push through an agenda that nobody could tell what it was intended to achieve at the time. Now, that conflict over IPAC, participation in IPAC, decisions of IPAC and so on, as far as I was concerned, was a precursor to some of the things that we saw happen later. Again, it was difficult to find situations in which the governing party disagreed with the Electoral Commission. On most occasions, whatever the Electoral Commission did was strongly, stoutly supported by the governing party. And the aesthetics there also didn't look good at all. Then there was the posture of the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission, indeed all the commissioners, had told us in the face that as far as they were concerned, they were independent, they had absolute independence, and were not subject to the control of any other institution in the country. They had even made it plain that they were not under obligation to listen to the views which were being expressed by the Ghanaian people and so on. Now, for me, as far as I'm concerned, that was an indication of the fact that the Electoral Commission did not understand its role. The reason why we have an Electoral Commission is simply the fact that 32 million Ghanaian people cannot organize an election, and that it is necessary to have some institution which exercises the power of the 38 million Ghanaians. So the powers of the Electoral Commission were not separate and distinct from the power of the people of Ghana. They were exercising those powers on behalf of the people of Ghana, and they were bound by extension of logic to, you know, hear what the people had to say. But the arrogance of this commission was beyond bounds. I mean, you could not believe it. Their emphasis on their independence and so on. Now, it was clearly absurd. I mean, having regard to the fact that the constitutional instruments which govern the conduct of elections and so on had to be laid before Parliament. That's a limitation to their independence. Indeed, many of the electoral processes, according to our constitution, end up with the judiciary for determination. That again is an indication of the limitation to the independence of the Electoral Commission and so on. But this Electoral Commission actually decided to play God right from the very beginning. And some of the things that we saw in this election clearly is a testimony to how this attempt to play God had negative impact on the conduct of the elections. The other thing which was extremely worrying for me was when persons who were card-bearing members of the New Patriotic Party or sympathizers of the New Patriotic Party were blatantly and openly appointed onto the Electoral Commission. It was mind-boggling. I couldn't believe it. For example, there was the appointment of Professor Tuahini. I hope that is the name. Apiahini. Professor Apiahini, who was a member of the communications team of the New Patriotic Party, and who had been heard in several radio programs, on several radio programs and TV programs, actually insisting that he would do everything and anything possible to keep the New Patriotic Party in power. This is a card-bearing member of the New Patriotic Party, self-confessed lover of the president, self-confessed lover of the New Patriotic Party and so on. And he was appointed onto the commission. I mean, unbelievable. And in spite of protests, from political parties, from civil society organizations and so on, he himself did not resign. He was not removed by any authority and continued to stay on this commission until election day, and still stays on the Electoral Commission and functions as a commissioner. For me, this is one of the major problems of the Electoral Commission. And I do hope that it will be resolved one way or the other, and very soon, you understand? So that for me was a major problem. There are many other issues. You had a situation where a machine, a verification machine of the Electoral Commission allegedly was missing. One machine was found somewhere in Nsawam, and it was intact with the emblem of the commission and everything intact. We were later told that that was a machine which had been auctioned and that somebody had bought that machine. I'm sitting here today and wondering why anybody would buy that machine. Bought it for what? A machine which was defective? A machine for elections? Defective? The Electoral Commission believed that the machine could not be repaired. That is why it was boarded. Why would anybody buy that machine? Be that as it may, we were also told about election material which was missing from the offices of the Electoral Commission. What happened to security at the Electoral Commission? How could vital, material for elections get missing so easily? As we speak, police investigations into that matter have yielded nothing. And I'm still highly worried about that. Now, on the day of the elections, I voted at a polling station at Musuku in the Kwabenya area. In fact, the Presbyterian Church polling station. And I was one of the early persons, to arrive at the polling station. I arrived at the polling station, by 6 a.m. I was there, waiting to cast my vote. Senna, I remained in the queue for 3 hours before voting began. What had happened? First of all, the materials for the elections, there were several booths, A, B, and C, and so on. Materials for the booth in which I was supposed to vote did not arrive at all. By 7 a.m., the materials had not arrived. So when the media started covering, a lot of noise was being made and so on, the election officials then brought in the ballot papers. And we thought that we could start voting. And then we were told that the stamp they used to stamp the back of the ballot paper had not arrived. One stamp had not arrived. Stamp had not arrived. Which election official sent the materials there first without the ballot papers, brought the ballot papers and didn't bring the stamp? And then later there was something else. So 3 items were brought in one after the other, to the extent that it caused a 3-hour delay. Now, Senna, you have to understand the polling station, its location, and why anybody would attempt to start these frustrations and so on. First and foremost, Musuku, where I live, used to be a small village, very small village. Now it's expanded. The vast majority of the people who live in that area are from the Volta region. That's most instructive. Okay? Now, if you look at previous election results, that polling station always voted overwhelmingly for the National Democratic Congress. So there's a suspicion, and it is a suspicion, that this was an attempt to frustrate voting, to get people so angry and so on, to leave in order to suppress votes in that polling station. And it's a suspicion. It's a legitimate suspicion, it's a credible suspicion, and it's a suspicion which we ought to take seriously. I mean, if you delay votes for 3 hours, it is possible that people will get so frustrated, they will leave the queue and never come back. You understand? And I'm worried that this situation persisted in that polling station. Again, it has been reported that there were many polling stations around the country where voting started late. Maybe our case was extreme, 3 hours was extreme. But there were some where voting started 1 hour late, 2 hours late, 30 minutes late, and so on. And it is important to look at these matters within the framework of previous election results, because that will tell us why some selected polling stations had this difficulty. Again, I was extremely worried about the positioning of the voting booths. You know, in the polling station where I voted, you know, these votes are supposed to be secret. You had the polling booths arranged in such a way that anybody could see how you were voting. It was so easy to see how you were voting. That was bad enough. But worse, there was somebody in one of the security uniforms standing behind and looking. So I took the trouble, you know, to go to the person and to tell the person that, look, you can't stand here. You're intimidating people. Because everybody can tell that you can see how people are voting. And that it goes against the election regulations and so get out of here. Initially, she resisted. First of all, I called an election officer and said, drive her out. The election officer went to speak to this lady. She refused to move. And I found it necessary to move myself and to tell her to move. She initially tried to move away, refused to move away. And so some pressure was brought upon her to move away. So the arrangement of the polling booth itself was a major problem. It violated, you know, the secret nature of elections and so on. And I was deeply troubled, you know, by that situation. Then there was something else that I noticed at my polling station. You know, people who have passed retiring age, 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, don't join queues. Okay. So they're given a special dispensation. They come because of their age and so on. They get in there and then they vote and then they move away. But I saw this dispensation being abused because there were people there who were ushering people ahead of the queue to go and vote. Now that for me was extremely problematic, but it did happen. Now, when you're looking at the preparations for this election, one of the other things that was extremely worrying was the Commission's attitude to the media. The Commission defined media as radio and television. The Commission refused to recognize newspapers as media. It refused to recognize the Ghana News Agency as media and refused to recognize online platforms as media. That in itself was a huge problem. It limited media access, you know, to polling stations. It limited media coverage of the elections and so on. Now the worst part was that the Commission had decided arbitrarily on a number of media houses which could cover the elections and had asked its officers, you know, at the regional and constituency levels to determine which media houses were credible. And I was wondering, how could electoral officials determine the credibility of media houses? What is the yardstick? What is the criteria? And so on. Now, fortunately, this move was roundly resisted. And as a result of that, eventually the Electoral Commission opened up. Now, one of the questions that I asked was, why this? Where is it coming from? Because we've had such elections from 1992. And nobody has complained about the numbers, the media coverage, the numbers of media houses which cover, these elections. And everybody was taken by surprise. In fact, the impression was that the arrangement was calculated to ensure that the critical media, the objective media, would not have access to polling stations and so on. But somehow, through the agitation of the Ghana Journalists Association, the media itself, civil society and other organizations, the Electoral Commission was compelled, to withdraw this directive and to open up media access to the polling stations and other election centers. The other thing which troubled me greatly was the introduction of mysticism into the elections. I mean, I was embarrassed as a Ghanaian. I was so heavily embarrassed as a Ghanaian when all of our leaders and all the political parties resorted to mysticism. Ghana, first and foremost, is supposed to be a secular state. So we ought to be doing things on the basis of empirical evidence. We ought to be doing things on the basis of things as they are. Okay? Because once you resort to mysticism, there's no basis for challenging everything or anything. There's no basis for evaluating any process. If it's God who arranges everything, how do you verify whether it is God or it's not God? You understand? Electoral Commissioner comes, he says, we are grateful to God Almighty for making it possible for us to do X, Y, Z. If it is God, how even dare you challenge God? Given all the attributes of God, somebody who has no mercy on those who disobey him, punishes everybody with vigor and so on. Even the courage to challenge what is supposed to be God's work is a problem. You understand? But the introduction of mysticism actually made it difficult to do things on the basis of empirical evidence. Sana, all of them, Dr. Bawumia, President Mahama, all of them, Ekweadonko before she died, and all of them, were claiming that everything they were doing was the work of God. This is a secular state. Electoral Commission, work of God. Civil society organizations, work of God, and so on. I was so deeply embarrassed by the level of mysticism which was introduced into this. And it did not surprise me that all kinds of charlatans emerge on the scene to use prophecies and soothsaying as a way of controlling the minds of our people and controlling the votes. Today, 1 week after the election, we do know that these people were simply charlatans. We do know. We know that they are absolute charlatans. And we know that the God we know, the God we were taught of in Sunday schools, would not support some of the things that have happened. Look, before the elections, there was this woman who actually predicted a win for Dr. Bawumia. And she said that at the end of the elections, if Dr. Bawumia did not win, it would show that God has been untruthful. The Christian God had been untruthful. And therefore, she would go back to worshipping fetish, idol, whatever, African traditional religion, and so on. Senna, can you believe it? The elections were conducted on Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, 24 hours after the election had taken place, when the results had not even been officially declared, This woman was waving NDC flags and dancing all over the place. Charlatan! I mean, complete charlatan. There was this other person who came and said that, look, he had a conversation with God. How he managed to have a conversation with God, he's the only one who knows. I mean, I made the point that he could be delusional. You know, he could be suffering from high fever and so on. But somehow, he made us believe that he actually had a conversation with God. And that God had told him that Dr. Bawumia will win, inshallah, hands down. And that if Dr. Bawumia did not win, he, together with his church, should be bent. I hope he's bought the petrol and the matches for that exercise. Charlatan! Complete charlatan! There was another one who calls himself a prophet, who first predicted victory for first said Dr. Bawumia could not win. After Dr. Bawumia went to his church and gave him a donation of 50,000, predicted that Dr. Bawumia was going to win. Then John Mahama went to his church and then he decided that John Dramani Mahama was going to win and so on. Charlatan! Barefaced charlatan! You understand? So all these charlatans were in full view. They operated in full view. And I think their purpose was to influence the outcome of the elections. To use the fear of God that many people have. And I have no problem with that. You can fear whatever you want to fear. Some people fear the God of Israel. Some people fear Akunedi. Some people fear Tigari and so on. Fear whatever you want to fear is your problem. You understand? But when institutions and organizations deliberately manipulate this way for electoral purposes, it devalues our elections. And that's why I get extremely worried about this level, you know, of devaluation, you know. Now, there is something else which came up in the conduct of this election, and that was the use of threats. I saw an MPP regional chairman actually sitting on television and threatening to kill. I'm sure you all saw the video. Said if they kill one, we will kill three, and so on. Now, that contributed to the intimidation of voters. And that may be responsible, may be responsible for what others have described as a low turnout. I'm not so sure that there was a low turnout. But these threats became a problem. Then there was the deliberate attempt by officials to suppress votes in certain key areas. And for me, one of those things happened to be the decision by the Ministry of Interior to close all land boundaries. Reckless, unlawful, shameful, and so on. Now, the Ministry of Interior had decided to close all land boundaries because, according to them, they suspected that Togolese were going to come and vote in this election. Now, you ought to take this with the history of elections in Ghana. And for some time, every time there was going to be an election, there had been the secessionist threat which is raised in the Volta region. It has been used to intimidate Ghanaians living in border towns and so on. It had been used to create an atmosphere of insecurity in the Volta region in order to suppress votes. We should be condemning that. Now, this year, it went one step further. 10 hours to the election, the Ministry of Interior decided to close all land boundaries. Now, the implication of that is very simple. If you were a Ghanaian, living in the UK, living in Germany, living in France, living in the United States of America and so on, you could decide that on the day of the election, you would jump onto a plane, fly into Ghana to vote. No problem with that. But if you are a Ghanaian living in Togo, a few meters away from Ghana, you were stopped from coming to vote on that day. What unfairness is that? What level of unfairness is that? I mean, it's so unfair, it's unbelievable. But we did it. Our Ministry of Interior did this shameful act, whose purpose could only have been the suppression of votes, along the border, or maybe by extension in the Volta region, and so on. It did happen, and I was ashamed that we could do such a thing, just for the purpose of winning an election or attempting, to win, an election. Now, a few hours before the elections, the New Patriotic Party also decided to hold a press conference. And this press conference sought to justify the actions of the Ministry of Interior. And the allegation simply was that an NDC activist or office bearer had been seen with dummy ballot papers. That's what they said, dummy ballot papers sent into Togo for voter education. And that he had been arrested. I said, what's the basis of this arrest? Because all political parties worth their name do print dummy ballot papers for the purpose of voter education. It's not new. Throughout our history, dummy ballot papers have been printed by the political parties for voter education. It is not a crime. You cannot use the dummy ballot papers in an election. You cannot stuff, ballot boxes with dummy ballot papers. Then we know also that there are Ghanaians resident in Togo who are bona fide members of political parties, just like Ghanaians registered in Germany, in London, and so on, join political parties, including the New Patriotic Party. And some of them come home to vote. In this election, you hear about UK chapter of this party, a Berlin chapter of that party. There are members coming here to vote. Is it illegal? So if one political party has members in Togo and decides to carry out voter education there, how does that become a criminal activity leading to arrest and leading to the holding of a whole press conference in order to create panic and so on? That's extremely worrying. One of the other things in this election, which also caused me some anxiety, was the blatant interference in our election processes by some Western embassies. I mean, it got so bad that the New Patriotic Party, which is perceived as an ally of the Western governments and embassies and so on, actually had to issue a very strong warning through one of his communicators, Saka. And I think it happened on this program. Warned the Western countries to stay away. Look, there is no doubt in my head that when it comes to the promotion of democratic values in Africa and in Ghana, one of our problems are the Western governments and their security agencies. Western governments and their security agencies have been a problem for 100 years in Africa. And they have subverted every attempt to build democratic institutions. Why? In the Congo, you know what happened? They killed Patrice Lumumba. Democratically elected Prime Minister of the Congo was killed. They removed his front teeth and so on. Was that a democratic act? Was that a democratic act? On September 21st, 1961, the British High Commissioner in Ghana, A.W. Snelling, sent a cable to his home government urging them to overthrow the Nkrumah government. Was that a democratic act? The declassified documents of the Central Intelligence Agency shows the extent to which the US interfered with our politics and introduced coup d'etats in our country. How does that contribute to the building of democracy? Now, there are declassified documents of the CIA about what happened in 1982 when Jerry Rawlings took power. And it's available, everybody can read it. And how the CIA and the Americans came to the conclusion that Jerry Rawlings was safe for them. And that their problem with the regime had to do with left-wing elements like Captain Chikata and others who were around Jerry Rawlings, and how they had to be neutralized and so on. These are declassified documents of the CIA and so on. You know, the coup d'etats across the world, the assassination of President Allende of Chile and so on. So these Western embassies, ambassadors, should not be encouraged to interfere in our democracy. They have no right, no moral authority. They don't have any principles which gives them even an iota of authority, moral authority or whatever, to meddle in our elections. And we should say this loud and clear. They do these things because they have interest in our country. And I don't know why we should even accept that they have interest in our country. And one of the clear interests that they have in our country, one, is the US military base in Ghana. They want to keep it. Before the election, NATO has asked La Côte d'Ivoire, Benin, and Ghana to give them permission to establish drone bases in our country. That is their interest. How to control us. They control the IMF and the World Bank. Your country is suffering from unemployment. And then you go to the IMF for a bailout. And they tell you that, look, we will give you 300 million. But when we give you 300 million, don't employ people in your public sector. And our leaders are so very stupid that they accept these conditions. And so on. So I have a fundamental problem with this blatant interference in our elections by the Western countries. Now sometimes this is justified. Some, they say it is justified. Some people come and try to justify it by saying that, oh, they are the donors. Donors? Donors? You mean that a country like Ghana, with the enormous resources it has, gold, manganese, bauxite, timber, rivers, intelligent people and so on, we cannot finance our own election, the choice of our leaders, and have to depend on other countries to choose our leaders? That's an embarrassment. It's a huge embarrassment that we should not countenance. We will come to discuss other aspects of the elections. But you see, last Thursday, Honorable Kofi Adams, Member of Parliament for the Buem constituency, said that, look, this Electoral Commission needs to be shaken up. But it has to be done according to law. It has to be done within the framework of the 1992 Constitution and so on. Because it failed. It failed in a very, very big way to conduct free and fair elections. Well, that statement is out there. People are commenting on it and so on. We want to see how this Electoral Commission, eventually will be sanitized. Because it's important to sanitize the Electoral Commission. You cannot have an Electoral Commission whose members are openly biased, who have no shame in displaying their bias, who carry their bias on their forehead. You cannot have an Electoral Commission like that. How we sanitize this Electoral Commission is the responsibility of all of us as Ghanaians. It's the responsibility that we cannot shirk. Because if we don't sanitize the Electoral Commission, it can lead to electoral controversies and electoral controversies have a tendency to destabilize countries, and so on. So we will come to discuss other aspects of this election, and I will make my points very, very clear. But I'm completely dissatisfied with the manner in which this election was conducted, irrespective of the outcome. Irrespective of the outcome, I am not convinced that we conducted this election in a manner which is the best. One, this is a country of 32 million people alive. Those who did statistics and so on should begin to query how a country of 32 million people has an electoral register which is made up of 18 million voters, qualified voters. 18 million qualified voters. And the 18 million qualified voters are those who are 18 years and above. Is that possible? This is a matter which has to be investigated. Look, the refusal of the Electoral Commission to do a forensic audit of the voters' register is a huge problem. Because when the time came to display the new voters' register and so on, you saw the problems. Thousands of people have been transferred, their votes have been transferred to other constituencies without their knowledge. How did that happen? Was that deliberate? And if it was not deliberate, what display of total incompetence and so on. So all of these are issues that need to be addressed at the appropriate time.
On the matter of the register, this is not the first time I'm hearing this. I think in the lead up to the 2016 elections, in fact, Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo went to the UK and said those same things. But when they took power, all they were interested in is in controlling the Electoral Commission. We are back here again. Anyway, but a few comments. Just that somebody said I should point out to you that you might just have started a beef with Agrada. So they say you should watch out. Yeah, there will be a response. There's a response. There will be a response to you. There's Peter Dojo says, okay, he is asking, please the uncle to organize a demonstration through which we can send a strong message to His Excellency Mahama not to keep any foreign military base in our country. We must demonstrate against that. There's Daniel Tell who says, Uncle Pratt, we could not pay bondholders and external creditors. How can we run election without donors? There's also Felicity Ajeotre who says the EC must be thoroughly purged, as well as the course from the highest to the lowest court of the land. A cap must be placed on the number of judicial appointees that can be made by a sitting president. Lastly, the governor of the Bank of Ghana should be added to the list of people who should face prosecution in this country. Uliamande Jikunu says, Senna and the great panelists, good morning. Given the current state of the economy and the haughty party members, how can the MPP gain power? Neil Ate says, okay, Kwesi Pratt, your friend the president also promised to build cathedral for God, but failed after having a conversation with him. I think when he was listening to the matter of the mysticism. Tamimu Isa says the Electoral Commission seems not to be learning from the situation where the Supreme Court has positioned itself and is now attracting several names aside from its supreme name in the attempt to favor Kofi Bento's Bawumia-led MPP. With the EC's consistent support and defense of the MPP in election matters, I anticipate seeing both declared MPs and redeclared MPs appearing in Parliament on January 7, 2025 for the swearing-in of the next Parliament, and the situation could be more violent than what was witnessed on January 7, 2021. So God help us. Abna Pokuaka says, Kwesi, the voting delay happened at Global Evangelical Church in the same Musoko area where I vote. The place is also a Voltarian-dominated area. The actual voting commenced at 10:30 a.m., which was very pathetic. In fact, just when we're talking about the delay on election day, the EC went to organize a press conference where they claimed that 95% of the polling stations' election has started early. Yet the reporters we spoke to even spoke to some high-profile.
Unfortunately, you can't choose who criticizes you.
That's also true.
You have no choice. So those who kept quiet before, those who developed sore throat and so on, they are still Ghanaians and they have a right to criticize you, and they will criticize you. The point is that you ought to conduct yourself in ways which would ensure that genuine people do not have the opportunity and the excuse to criticize you. That's the point. You understand? That you cannot decree that so-and-so cannot criticize you. Unfortunately, that is the truth. Time is over, isn't it? But let me do something very, very small, you know. If you look at the results, for all practical purposes, the new Patriotic Party does not have representation in 5 regions out of 16. In 5 out of 16 regions, it doesn't have any members of parliament. That's troubling. If you look at the results, for the first time since 1992, a lot of people like to talk about the first time in history and so on, the CPP actually defeated the MPP more massively than this one in the 1951 elections. But from 1992, I've never seen an election in which MPP was scoring zeros at polling stations. I mean, it's incredible, just zeros and so on. Now, for me, the other implication of this election is that given the massive numbers that the NDC has gained in parliament, if the NDC refuses to be responsible, this country is in big trouble. You understand? If the NDC decides to act irresponsibly, my goodness, we are in trouble. What is it that they cannot pass through parliament, including constitutional amendments and so on? And therefore, this situation calls for extra vigilance on the part of the population. We have to open our eyes. We have to check everything, feature. Otherwise, this country can be in very big trouble. Now, if you look at this result, the other thing that it suggests, and many people have not averted their minds to that, I mean, everybody is still looking at NDC versus MPP. It's gone beyond that. You remember that before the elections, there were some people who came up and said, this is Ghana versus MPP. It's reflected in these elections. What actually happened was that a mass movement emerged. And that mass movement is neither MPP nor NDC. It's a movement without a leadership. It's a movement without shape and so on. And that movement is what has brought this situation about. For me, the most important lesson is not for the NPP alone. The most important lesson is for all political actors. Whether you are CPP, GPD, WCS or NDC or whatever, you have to understand that the real mandate, the sovereignty, belongs to the people and they can take it anytime. And you must realize that the people of Ghana are wide awake and will not allow anybody to play tricks with their interests. It's a lesson that everybody in the political space must learn. Sometimes our leaders forget. This country, the people of Ghana, they overthrew British colonialism through mass popular struggles at a time when Britain ruled the waves. One of the strongest armies in the world and so on, we defeated them. Look at the things that we have defeated throughout history. We've defeated military regimes, we've defeated civilian regimes and so on. Don't take the people of Ghana for granted. The people of Ghana still are a potent force. They are focused, they know what they want, and if you don't deliver, they will show you the door. No matter who you are, they will show you the door. Finito.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And on that note, let me say a big thank you to our partners, Hills FM Adaklo 91.7, Nyawasi Radio Ketekrachi on 89.7, The Stellar Radio Dabala on 97.1, Diamond FM in Tamale on 93.7, Bewa Radio is in Yendi, they are on 106.5, Yodekidon in Saboba on 95.7, Benya FM Elmina 105.7, Global FM in Ho 105.1, Zeps FM in Zebila 95.9, True FM in Adeso 92.5, Lamara FM 89.1 in Tripoli, Boem 88.7 FM in Jessica and Lukusi 96.1 in Virgo Lokwati. Tyne FM is on 90.9, Sekpele 104.3. There's Akwini Radio in Pando, there's Denigba Radio 90.9 FM, there's Uti Radio in Dambai. Thank you all for listening to us and of course for watching us live on Pan-African Television. We're live from the Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah studios of Pan-African Television. We're also live on Facebook on Pan-African Television. Thank you for your time. A big thank you to my panel for today.
Once again, I thank you for your time on the channel. Please, if you're a new member and you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please do so for us. Hit the notification bell for more updates. Like and also share to other members to watch as well. You can equally leave a comment after watching. Thank you. Stay tuned for more.
Dedi kama mamena PENDREAM TV ase. Na so far so good. Say open online portal e wo Ghana. Nipa share, nipa follow, nipa comment here. To my best of knowledge, without any biases, PENDREAM TV.